Well, the federal government, for its part, is standing firm on this trucker vaccine mandate policy. It put out a statement today, along with the Truckers Alliance of Canada. Carla Qualtrough is the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion. She's in Delta, BC. Minister Qualtrough, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
I wanted to ask why you felt the need to put out this joint statement with the Canadian Trucking Alliance.
Well, my colleagues and I have worked so closely with the Trucking Alliance, with the industry since the beginning of the pandemic, and we thought it was really important to acknowledge, that the majority of truckers, over 90%, are vaccinated, and that, we've really seen minimal change in trucker volume, but that we're very aligned more broadly in an agreement that vaccination is the best line of defense against COVID-19. And so we really wanted to state very clearly that we are in agreement with industry on this and working together.
You say you're aligned and there's agreement, but are you alarmed by what you're seeing, this group that is moving towards Ottawa?
I wouldn't say I'm alarmed. I mean, people have a right to peaceful protest, and I don't think this reflects the general view, certainly not what I've heard from truckers in my riding here in Delta. But I'm more alarmed about Conservative MPs getting out there and supporting and encouraging this. But at the same time, people have a right to protest.
Are you able to give us a sense today of how many truckers are unvaccinated right now and could be off the road because of this mandate?
I don't have that stat. I apologize. What I do know and can say quite confidently is there's been very minimal change in terms of trucker volume across the border. We know that from working with the CTA that about 90% of truckers are vaccinated. We also know that this is a joint Canada-US measure. We know that both countries think this is important. So you have to be vaccinated to go down to the States, and you have to be vaccinated to come back from the States. And so I feel like the urgency of this, while an important conversation needs to be had about supply chains, and we can have that conversation. And in fact, we're having it next week. We're having a National Supply Chain Summit. This might be the flashpoint, but it's not the rub on the supply chain.
The latest number we have from the Trucking Alliance is an estimate. It says about 16,000 truckers may not be able to cross the border. That's not a small number. So how do you keep that from impacting already struggling supply chains?
Well, I think it's by continuing to educate truckers, continuing to work with the CTA, working with provinces and territories, maybe changing routes so people who aren't vaccinated focus on within Canada distribution. But as I said, the supply chain is most at risk from COVID, not from this issue with truckers, as important as it is. And labor shortages that may result from this are much more threatening due to workplace or community outbreak than, again, from this particular issue.
The Canadian Chamber of Commerce and the Manufacturers Association are a bit more concerned, it seems, than you are, and they actually want your government to press pause on this at this point. Is that completely off the table right now?
Oh, please don't take me as saying I'm not concerned. I'm just saying that I think that the bigger threat to the supply chain is COVID. The bigger threat to labor shortages within our economy is a sick workforce, is a workforce that can't work. I'm not saying this isn't an issue at all. I apologize. There is no intention right now of putting pause on this, particularly as we do this in lockstep with the US. But again, we're doing other things within our government, like our Supply Chain Summit next week, to address supply chain issues, which are real. And as we said in our statement with the CTA, very of concern to truckers and to industry.
We are still very lucky and privileged in this country in terms of what we have access to, but many Canadians are concerned about what they are seeing or not seeing in the stores that they go to, grocery stores in particular, the selection, but also the prices. So what would you say to them? How would you ensure that the already clogged supply chain is not going to get worse?
Well, first of all, we know Canadians are worried. Prices have gone up for food and fuel and shelter, and their dollars simply aren't being stretched as far. We acknowledge that. We are focused on affordability. We're focused on the cost of living. COVID is still a very real economic pressure. And, as Stats Canada said when they put out their latest inflation numbers, it's what's driving up a lot of this inflation. There's things we can do. We have to address supply chain issues. We have to get more people vaccinated. We have to work on addressing labor shortages on a number of fronts. But I guess I would remind Canadians that we entered the pandemic in a really good financial or fiscal position, and we're there now as well, and we're going to get through this, and we're going to, as a government, continue to have their backs.
The statement references, quote, long-term strategies that will, yield outcomes that will make the supply chain issues even better, lasting results, as you put it. But what specifically are those strategies?
Well, to address the labor shortage in particular, which is, of course, the crux of the supply chain, we can't necessarily control what's going on everywhere around the world, but we can make sure that we have skilled workers, that we are maximizing workforce participation, that we are supporting our next generation of workers, that we're, attracting talent from around the world. Those are the things we have control of within Canada. Certainly as the employment minister, there are things I am constantly turning my mind to in terms of strategies to address labor shortages. But at the end of the day, we just all have to keep working on this, both in the short term, and I think of the temporary foreign worker program, but also in the longer term.
You've seen and certainly heard the frustration from many people on this mandate issue, but also the misinformation. So do you feel your government has really done enough to inform, educate, prepare Canadians for what we are going through? Because their complaints keep coming. The frustrations keep boiling over. We've seen this before.
Well, certainly, again, I sympathize with the feeling of frustration and anxiety and uncertainty and isolation. And this has been a long haul for Canadians across the country. Sorry to use a trucker analogy there. But, I think we've tried to be consistent in our message since the beginning that vaccination would be the way through this. Of course, we can always do more. And I think of what I'm doing in my own writing, but I continually hear from parents in particular who are uncertain, even if they've had vaccines, if they should vaccinate their children. And I tell them my kids are vaccinated and it's safe. Health Canada wouldn't approve vaccines that aren't safe. But I just think we keep having to reinforce the message. This is the best tool in our toolkit. It's not the only one, but it's the best one we have.
As you know, it has become a very divisive issue in many circles. Conservatives accuse your government of fueling those divisions by appearing to take a hard stance and not showing flexibility for some Canadians. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think they're the ones fueling this. With all due respect, of course, I think all of us as elected officials have a responsibility and indeed a duty to do our part by encouraging public health measures, encouraging vaccination, keeping the science and the expert advice top of mind when we have these discussions. It frustrates me that this has become so hyper partisan, I guess I would say, when really this is about following the advice of people who day to day think about these things and advise leaders on how to move forward. And they all say vaccines.
But the Conservatives have said and will continue to say that it's the Liberal government that hasn't been listening to many Canadians and their concerns.
Well, I think the vaccination numbers say something entirely different. With 90 in my writing, 96% of adults are vaccinated first dose, and I think it's 95% now second dose. Canadians are getting vaccinated, and it's just working with and respecting the concerns of those who aren't vaccinated, talking to their doctors, talking to them, and kind of removing the politics from this and really getting down to the science and best advice and expert guidance on what we can do moving forward on this. That's certainly how I approach it here.
Are there plans to address and communicate with the group that is traveling across the country and planning to be, on Parliament Hill this weekend?
Well, we're looking, of course, to respect the views of these individuals, which we do. And as I said, everyone has a right to peaceful protest. We just have to be mindful that the message we will give them and we will send to all Canadians continues to be, please understand that the bigger risk here is COVID, the biggest risk here, whether it's in your workplace. If we have people off sick, they're not working and our trucks won't be moving at all. And this is not the vast majority of the industry that we're dealing with here.
Before we let you go, Minister, you are a Paralympian, a decorated swimmer. So I did want to ask you, as we look ahead to the Beijing Games, there are so many concerns about where they're being held, cybersecurity concerns, COVID-19 concerns. Are you worried about Team Canada?
Listen, I've had the pleasure of both representing Canada and being on mission staff as a volunteer at a number of games. I've attended games as sport minister. I will attend a games in any capacity anybody will ever let me attend a games. And I am confident in the security measures in place for protecting our athletes. I'm confident that the Olympic Committee and Paralympic Committee are doing everything they can to keep our athletes safe. I think there's a real responsibility, even more so this time on athletes, to follow the advice, be prudent in how they comport themselves. But I have every confidence that our teams will be safe, and knowing the leadership as I do of both the Olympic and Paralympic committees can assure Canadians that we as a government are doing everything we can to keep their loved ones, their athletes safe.
We will leave it there. Minister Qualtrough, thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Nice speaking with you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.